Grace, let's break up. Ethan's voice cut through the restaurant's din, landing clearly in her ears. Beside him stood SKYLAR, impeccably made up, her arm linked through his, a clear declaration of possession. Grace's fingers, gripping the menu, paused for a moment before regaining their composure. She looked up, not at him, but at the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Outside, the city lights were just coming on, like a grand fireworks display that had nothing to do with her. All right. One word, light as a feather, devoid of any superfluous emotion. Ethan's prepared speech was instantly stifled. He had expected her to cry, to make a scene, to demand why. But she didn't. She simply took out her phone, calm, and dialed a number. Uncle, the wedding called off. Terminate all collaborations. What did you say? Ethan could barely believe his ears. Grace hung up the phone, finally letting her gaze fall on him. The eyes that had always been filled with love now held the inscrutable depth of an ancient well. I said, all right, she repeated, then placed her phone back in her bag, her movements unhurried. The wedding called off, I can understand, Ethan said, his brow furrowed. What do you mean by terminating all collaborations? Grace, don't start throwing a childish tantrum. He thought Grace was trying to threaten him, using her small design studio to leverage him. Ridiculous. Would enterprises care about a small design studio that struggled even to get started? Ethan, do you really think I have nothing without you? Grace suddenly smiled, though the mirth didn't reach her eyes. SKYLAR leaned against Ethan, speaking with the air of a victor. Sister, please don't be like this. Ethan didn't mean it that way. You can't force feelings. Since the love is gone, letting go is best for everyone. She addressed him as Ethan so intimately and naturally. Grace didn't even glance at her. She simply stood up and straightened her skirt. Ethan, you made a choice. Now it's my turn. With that, she turned and left, without a single moment of lingering regret. Ethan watched her resolute back, an inexplicable surge of anger rising within him. He disliked this feeling of losing control. He was the one who initiated the breakup, he was the one in control, so why did Grace's reaction unsettle him so much? Ethan, is she mad? SKYLAR shook his arm, a hint of grievance in her tone. Ethan snapped back to reality, forcibly suppressing his unease. He patted her hand reassuringly. Don't mind her. Just a spoiled princess, she'll come around in a few days. He put his arm around SKYLAR and sat down in the spot she had reserved, as if everything that had just happened was merely a minor interlude. The surrounding guests were friends and family who had come for their final rehearsal dinner before the wedding. At that moment, everyone's expressions were a sight to behold. Ethan's mother, Margaret, quickly walked over, her voice lowered, her face full of displeasure. Ethan, what are you doing? Where's Grace? The wedding is about to happen. Mom, I broke up with her, Ethan said dismissively. I'm marrying SKYLAR. Margaret's gaze swept over SKYLAR, her disgust palpable. Are you out of your mind? Don't you know the Thompson family situation? It's a shell company. Grace, despite her ordinary background, is sweet and sensible, and devoted to you. How is she not better than this woman? Mom, I'm in love with SKYLAR, Ethan insisted stubbornly. And Robert has already promised me that if I marry SKYLAR, he'll transfer the East property to my name. Hearing about the East property, Margaret's expression softened slightly. That property was currently the lifeline Hayes desperately needed. Is that true? Of course, Ethan said with certainty. Margaret's face finally relaxed, though her gaze towards SKYLAR remained unfriendly. She waved her hand and told the surrounding guests, tonight's dinner is cancelled. Please go home for now. I apologize. A meticulously planned dinner ultimately ended in disarray. Ethan drove SKYLAR home. On the way, he received a call from his father, William. What's going on with you and Grace? I just received a notification from Vance saying they unilaterally terminated project. William's roar almost pierced through the phone. Ethan's heart sank. Vance? The legendary, mysterious family enterprise that never showed its face? Hayes had gone to great lengths to establish a connection with Vance, preparing to collaborate on project. If this project succeeded, Hayes would instantly become an industry leader. Dad, did you get it wrong? What does our collaboration with Vance have to do with Grace? How should I know? Their assistant just said it was their CEO's order. William fumed. Go get Grace back immediately. No matter what you have to do, you must make her change her mind. Ethan hung up the phone, and his car made a screeching brake sound by the roadside. Vance, Grace. An absurd thought flashed through his mind, too quickly for him to grasp. Impossible. The he knew had ordinary teacher parents and ran a small design studio, so modest she was almost shabby. How could she be connected to Vance, that commercial empire? It had to be a coincidence. He took out his phone and dialed Grace's number. "Hello, the number you have dialed is not in service." The cold, mechanical female voice completely unnerved him. He immediately turned the car around and drove towards the old apartment complex where Grace rented. He had to find her immediately and get to the bottom of it. Ethan rushed upstairs, pounding forcefully on the familiar door. "Grace! Open the door. I know you're in there." No answer. He knocked a few more times, but inside, it remained dead silent. The unsettling feeling in his heart grew stronger, almost consuming him. He found the landlord and opened the door with the spare key. The room was empty. All of Grace's belongings had vanished overnight, without a trace. It was as if she had never lived there. Only a diamond ring lay alone on the living room table. It was the one he had personally placed on her finger 2 months ago when he proposed. The diamond reflected a cold light in the dimness. Ethan picked up the ring, and its icy touch sent a shiver down his spine. It was then he realized how little he knew about Grace. He didn't know her friends, didn't know if she had anywhere else to go besides this small rental apartment. He had always assumed her life revolved around him, that she would always be there if he turned back. But now, she was gone, taking all traces with her, and taking the future of his company too. Ethan returned home in a daze, the living room a mess. His mother, Margaret, was yelling at his father, William. "It's all your fault. I never agreed to collaborate with Vance. Now look, the project is ruined, and the company is about to go bankrupt. What do you know?" William pushed her away. "What's the use of saying that now? It's all your precious son's doing." He saw Ethan return, grabbed the ashtray from the table, and threw it at him. "You ungrateful son. I told you to go find Grace, where were you?" Ethan barely dodged it, and the ashtray shattered against the wall. "She's gone. Her phone is off, and she's moved out," he said wearily. "Useless." William trembled with rage. "How could I have begotten such a good-for-nothing? For one woman, you've ruined the entire Hayes family." Ethan leaned against the wall, his mind a jumble. He couldn't understand how things had come to this. Who exactly was Grace? What was her relationship with Vance? How could the woman he had never taken seriously, even looked down upon, so easily decide the fate of his entire family? "Dad, is there really no room for negotiation with Vance?" he asked, clutching a last sliver of hope. "Negotiation?" William sneered. Vance's CEO assistant said that unless Ethan kneels outside the city's tallest skyscraper and grovels for forgiveness, no. T only will project be cancelled, but they will also use every resource to target all of Hayes Industries. Kneel? Grovel for forgiveness? Ethan's face instantly turned ashen. Margaret was also stunned. She murmured that, who exactly is she? No one could answer her. Meanwhile, Grace was on a private jet, leisurely sipping wine. Across from her sat a well-dressed middle-aged man, Uncle, who had served her father for many years. "Ms. Grace, everything is handled," Uncle reported respectfully. "The family is already in chaos." Grace swirled the crimson liquid in her cup, the wine making beautiful arcs under the light. "Understood," she replied indifferently. 3 years of a relationship, to say she felt nothing would be a lie. But that feeling had died the moment Ethan appeared before her with SKYLAR. She, Grace, didn't need him. She just wanted to live a normal life, to have a romance untainted by any interests. It was Ethan who had shattered her dream. "What did Grandpa say?" she asked. "Grandpa said that once you've had enough fun, it's time to come home and inherit the family business." Uncle's tone held a hint of amusement. "Arthur from the Sterling is already waiting for you." Grace put down her cup and looked out the window. The plane cut through the clouds, and below lay the sparkling lights of countless homes. "Ethan, this is just the beginning." Hayes stock plummeted without warning. In just one day, its market value evaporated by nearly $3 billion. The bank's collection calls came one after another, and partners came knocking to terminate contracts. William was overwhelmed, his hair turning half-white in just 2 days. He finally realized that Vance wasn't joking. They were genuinely intent on destroying the Hayes family. "Ethan, go beg her, go beg Grace." Margaret clutched Ethan's arm, as if grasping a last straw. "Go kneel before her. Go grovel for forgiveness. Do whatever it takes to help the Hayes family through this crisis." The woman who had offed at Grace just 2 days ago was now groveling in the dust. Ethan's heart was filled with humiliation and resentment. He, the distinguished young master of the Hayes family, was to kneel before a woman he had abandoned? However, seeing his father's suddenly aged face and the anxious atmosphere at home, he knew he had no choice. He began frantically searching for Grace. He went to her parents' house, but the simple old teachers coldly shut the door on him. He asked all their mutual friends, but no one knew Grace's whereabouts. She had vanished as if into thin air. Just as Ethan was nearing despair, he received an address from an unknown number. The auction, VIP lounge. Ethan immediately drove there. The auction was the top auction house in the country, and only the wealthy and influential could enter. He had accompanied his father once before, but hadn't even been allowed inside, only permitted to watch from the lobby. The address he received, however, was for an exclusive floor accessible only to top VIPs. Ethan's heart sank little by little. He had a premonition that today, he would see a Grace who would completely shatter his understanding of her. Using the text message, he was respectfully led by a waiter to the entrance of the VIP lounge. The heavy solid wood door swung open, and the sight inside made him gasp. Grace was sitting on the central sofa. She had shed her usual cotton dress, donning a perfectly tailored black velvet suit. Her long hair was swept up, revealing her slender, fair neck. She wore light makeup, yet she looked more radiant and captivating than ever before. Beside her sat a handsome and tall man. He was leaning his head, speaking gently to her, and she smiled faintly, her eyes sparkling with a brilliance he had never seen before. Ethan recognized that man. Arthur, the heir to Sterling, and someone the Hayes family had always sought to align with, but was known for being low-key and rarely appeared in public. Now, he sat beside Grace like a knight, guarding her. Ethan's heart felt as if an invisible hand had gripped it tightly, making it painful to breathe. So, she wasn't without radiance. It was just that her light had never shone for him. Grace seemed to sense his arrival and slowly looked up. Their eyes met. In her gaze, there was no longer the former adoration and love, only a profound calm and detachment. It was as if she were looking at an irrelevant stranger. "What are you doing here?" She spoke first, her voice not loud, but clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. Ethan's throat was dry, and he struggled to speak. "Grace, let's talk. What is there left for us to talk about?" Grace picked up the cup from the table and gently blew on it. Ethan's words caught in his throat. Before coming, he had imagined countless possibilities. He had thought she would hysterically question him, or cry and beg him to reconcile. He had even prepared his excuses, thinking that if she begged, he might magnanimously consider it. But he had never expected her to be so calm that it panicked him. "Mr. Hayes." Arthur stood up, positioning himself between Grace and Ethan. He was half a head taller than Ethan, and his powerful aura instantly suppressed Ethan. "If you're here to discuss project, there's no need. Vance will never collaborate with someone who lacks integrity." Arthur's words struck Ethan like a heavy hammer. He finally confirmed that the absurd thought was true. Grace was part of Vance. And, judging by Arthur's demeanor towards her, her status was certainly not low. "Grace," he tried to bypass Arthur, reaching for Grace's hand. "Let me explain, Skylar and I, get out." A cold word escaped Grace's lips. Ethan's hand froze midair. "What did you say?" Ethan's face drained of all color. He couldn't believe that Grace, who had once been so obedient and wouldn't even dare to speak loudly to him, was telling him to get out. "I said, get out." Grace didn't even look at him again, her gaze fixed on the auction stage. "Mr. Hayes, please leave and don't disturb us." Arthur's voice also turned cold. He made a gesturing motion, his attitude firm. The surrounding guests all watched with an air of amusement. Ethan's face turned from green to pale. He had never suffered such humiliation in his life. He wanted to lash out, but facing Arthur's inscrutable eyes, all his bluster died down. He knew he couldn't afford to offend Arthur. And even less, Grace, who stood behind Arthur. "Grace, do you have to be so heartless?" he gritted out, forcing the words through his teeth. Grace finally deigned to cast him a glance. "Heartless?" She sounded as if she had heard the biggest joke. "Ethan, when you brought Skylar and humiliated me in front of all our friends and family, why didn't you call yourself heartless? When you abandoned me without hesitation for the East property, why didn't you call yourself heartless? Now, how dare you accuse me?" With each sentence she spoke, Ethan's face grew paler. He didn't know that she knew everything. He opened his mouth but found he couldn't utter a single word. Yes, what right did he have? He was the one who had pushed her away. He was the one who, for the sake of supposed gain, had given up on their relationship. "Ethan, just leave." Grace's voice held a hint of weariness. "For the sake of our past 3 years, I'll give you one last shred of dignity. Don't ever appear before me again." With that, she ignored him, turning back to resume her conversation with Arthur. It was as if Ethan was merely an insignificant interlude. Ethan stood rooted, his hands and feet growing cold. He watched Grace and Arthur talking and laughing, saw the brilliant smile on her face that she had never shown him, and his heart felt as if it were being slowly tortured. What exactly had he lost? He didn't know how he left the auction. He only knew that when he walked out the ornate gates and saw the dazzling sunlight outside, his world had completely collapsed. He returned to Hayes, greeted by faces etched with despair. "Mr. Hayes, the bank issued a final ultimatum. If the loan isn't repaid by tomorrow, they'll apply for forced execution. Mr. Hayes, our biggest supplier has also cut off supply, saying they won't give us a single piece of fabric until previous payments are settled. Mr. Hayes, the workers demanding their pay are gathered downstairs." Bad news piled up, one after another, suffocating him. William sat in the CEO's office, looking 10 years older overnight. "It's over, everything is over," he muttered. Ethan pushed the door open. Seeing his father's desperate state, his last line of defense completely crumbled. He dropped to his knees before William with a thud. "Dad, I'm sorry, it's my fault. I ruined the Hayes family." William looked up, his clouded eyes fixed on him, devoid of anger, only a profound emptiness. "What's the use of saying that now? Ethan, do you know what you missed out on?" William's voice was terribly hoarse. "Grace, she is Henry's only granddaughter, the founder of Vance. She is the sole heir to the entire Vance empire. Her shares alone are 100 times more valuable than all of Hayes' assets combined. When she was with you, concealing her identity, it was a test from Henry. If you had married her successfully, the entire Vance would have become your strongest backing. But you? For the Thompson family, for that worthless piece of land, you threw away a gold mine." Every word from William was like a knife, savagely piercing Ethan's heart. The only granddaughter. The sole heir. A gold mine. What exactly had he done? Immense regret and pain instantly engulfed him. He remembered what Grace had told him. She said, "You made a choice. Now, it's my turn." So, this was what she truly meant. What he had given up was not just an ordinary girl, but the entire world. When's call came, Ethan was sitting alone in his empty office, staring blankly at the scattered documents. "Ethan, where are you? My dad said he wants to take you to dinner to discuss our engagement." Skylar's voice was sugary sweet, with a hint of urgency he couldn't miss. Engagement? Ethan found the word incredibly ironic. He was barely holding on himself. What did he have to offer for an engagement? "I'm not going," he refused coldly. "Why not?" Skylar's tone grew dissatisfied. "Ethan, what's wrong with you these past few days? You've been ignoring me. Has come looking for you again?" At the mention of Grace, Ethan's heart twinged again. "Skylar, when will your father transfer that property he promised me?" He now clung to this last glimmer of hope. Silence stretched for a few seconds on the other end. "Ethan, about the property, there's a problem." Skylar's voice was evasive. "What problem?" Ethan's heart tightened abruptly. "That property has been seized." "What?" Ethan shot up from his chair. "What do you mean, seized?" "It means, my dad's company ran out of capital, owes the bank a huge amount of money, and all his assets have been frozen." Skylar's voice trailed off. Ethan felt a sudden wave of dizziness. Capital chain broken? Assets frozen? What exactly had he gained by abandoning Grace for Skylar? A complete and utter scam. "Skylar, are you playing me?" His voice was filled with malice. "No, I'm not. Ethan, I didn't know things would turn out this way." Skylar quickly defended herself. "My dad is also a victim. It's all Vance's fault. They suddenly pulled all their investments. That's why my dad's company, Vance." Again, Vance. Ethan gave a bitter laugh and collapsed back into his chair. He understood. Everything was Grace's revenge. She wasn't just going to ruin the Hayes family, she also wanted him to see what a ridiculous opponent he had chosen for the sake of his so-called future. "Ethan, are you still listening? Please help my dad, okay? Go beg Grace to let our family go." Skylar pleaded, her voice choked with tears. "Beg her?" Ethan sounded as if he had heard the biggest joke. "You want me to beg her? Skylar, do you know that I don't even have the right to see her now? I'm telling you, we're finished. The family is finished, and your Thompson family is finished too." He finished, then hung up the phone directly and slammed it against the wall. The phone screen instantly shattered into pieces, just like his heart at that moment. Regret, resentment, anger, despair. All these emotions intertwined, threatening to tear him apart. He remembered his 3 years with Grace. She always quietly followed behind him, cooking for him, taking care of everything. When he worked late, she would keep the lights on, waiting for him. When he was sick, she would stay up all night to nurse him. He thought it was all natural. He thought she couldn't live without him. Only now did he understand that it wasn't natural, it was love. It was he who had personally lost the most precious love in the world. Meanwhile, Grace was feeding fish in her private garden. Arthur stood beside her, holding a parasol to shield her from the warm afternoon sun. Everything's handled, Arthur said softly. Thompson has already filed for bankruptcy protection, and Hayes stock has hit its trading limit. It won't be long before it's delisted. Grace sprinkled the last of the fish food into the pond and clapped her hands. You don't seem very happy, Arthur said, looking at her serene profile. There's nothing to be happy or unhappy about, Grace's tone was light. I simply took back what was mine, and gave a disobedient dog a lesson, incidentally. The dog she referred to was, naturally, Ethan. Arthur smiled and said nothing more. He knew there was still a hurdle in her heart. That hurdle, she had to overcome herself. Oh, right, Grandpa wants you to come home for dinner tonight, Arthur said. He said he has something important to discuss with you. Important? Grace raised an eyebrow. About our engagement? Arthur's earlobes flushed lightly, and he nodded. Grace couldn't help but chuckle at his flustered look. All right then, she agreed readily. Then, I'll see you tonight. Watching walk away, Arthur's eyes held a tenderness that could almost drip. Grace, this time, I won't let go again. Ethan didn't know how long he had been sitting in the office. It wasn't until darkness had completely fallen that he rose like a ghost and walked out of the company building. Downstairs, some protesting workers were still gathered. Seeing him emerge, the crowd instantly stirred. Ethan's out. Give us our hard-earned money back. Various shouts and accusations surged towards him like a tide. He was shoved by several emotional workers, looking utterly disheveled. If the security guards hadn't arrived in time, he probably would have been torn apart by the angry crowd. He drove aimlessly through the streets. The city's neon lights flickered, every corner filled with joy and laughter, yet there was no place for him. By some strange impulse, he drove near the Vance estate. It was a vast Chinese-style private garden enclosed by high walls. In the heart of downtown, where every inch of land was precious, it stood like an independent kingdom. He had only seen it in financial magazines before, knowing it was the residence of Vance's founder, a symbol of power and wealth. He had never imagined he would have any connection to it. Even less, that his former girlfriend was its owner. He parked his car in an inconspicuous corner and quietly watched the ornate gates. He wanted to go inside. He wanted to see Grace. He wanted to tell her he was wrong, that he regretted it. He wanted to beg her for another chance, but he didn't even have the right to enter. Just then, a black Rolls-Royce slowly approached and stopped at the main entrance. The car door opened, and Arthur stepped out first. He gentlemanly opened the other side door, and Grace emerged. She wore an elegant, form-fitting evening gown in moonlit white today, draped with a white fur stole, making her look incredibly beautiful. She linked her arm with Arthur's. They were a handsome couple, truly a perfect match. They smiled at each other, their unspoken understanding and intimacy piercing Ethan's eyes. He saw Grace say something to Arthur, then she stood on her tiptoes and lightly kissed Arthur's cheek. In that moment, Ethan felt his world completely crumble into ashes. He had always thought Grace was reserved, shy. She would never make such an intimate gesture in public. Apparently, she wasn't incapable of it. It was just that the person wasn't him. He watched them walk through the ornate gates, until the door slowly closed, cutting off his view. He punched the steering wheel, letting out a muffled thud. Why? Why did this happen? If he hadn't ended things, would he be the one standing beside her now? If he had realized her worth sooner, would things be different today? But there were no if-onlys in this world. He had lost. Lost completely. Inside the Vance estate, the lights were ablaze. Henry sat at the head of the table, full of vigor. Seeing Arthur enter, he beamed with joy. You're back, come sit, he said. Grandpa, Grace greeted sweetly. Hello, Grandpa, Arthur also greeted respectfully. Good, 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 Henry looked at Arthur with satisfaction. Arthur, our Grace will be in your care from now on. Grandpa, please rest assured, I will take good care of Grace, Arthur promised solemnly. Grace's cheeks flushed slightly. Grandpa, it's not set in stone yet, she said playfully. What do you mean, not set in stone? I think you two are quite suitable, Henry waved his hand. I think the 8th of next month is a good day. You two should get engaged first. So fast? Grace was a little surprised. Not fast at all, Henry said. You're not young anymore, it's time to start a family. Besides, your ex-boyfriend has been buzzing around like a fly lately. An early engagement will make him give up for good. At the mention of Ethan, Grace's eyes darkened slightly. Grandpa, did you have someone make a move? No, Henry said. I just had someone expose the Thompson family's shell company. As for the Hayes family, that's their own doing, they have no one to blame but themselves. I just never expected that my granddaughter, Henry's granddaughter, would fall for such a fool. Henry's tone was filled with contempt for Ethan. Grace fell silent. Yes, why had she fallen for him in the first place? Perhaps it was 3 years ago, when she ran away from home, had her purse stolen, and was squatting on a street corner, hungry and cold. He had offered her a warm bun. At that time, she thought he was the best person in the world. Looking back now, it was truly laughable. Grace, let the past be the past, Arthur said, holding her hand and comforting her softly. One must always look forward. Grace looked up, met his gentle gaze, and nodded. Yes, one must always look forward. She and Ethan were thoroughly in the past. The family's bankruptcy proceedings moved faster than expected. Without corporation's restraint, the predatory rivals, like sharks circling blood in the water, swarmed in and devoured the Hayes family completely. William couldn't withstand the blow and suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, landing him in the hospital. Margaret wept daily, keeping vigil by his bedside. The entire Hayes family was left with only Ethan. He sold his villa, sold his luxury cars, barely managing to scrape together his father's medical expenses. From the clouds to the mud, it took only half a month. He moved into a small, damp rental apartment, much like the one Grace used to live in. He started looking for work, but no company would hire him. He was the prodigal son of the Hayes family, a disgraced figure who had offended Vance. In this circle, he was infamous. He faced rejection everywhere, experiencing the harsh realities of life. He finally understood the hardships Grace had faced when she was struggling alone. No, he was even worse off than her. She at least had talent and dreams. As for him, apart from the hollow title of young Hayes, he had nothing. That day, he dragged his weary body back to the rental apartment and unexpectedly saw SKYLAR at the door. SKYLAR had lost a lot of weight and looked much more haggard, devoid of her former glamour. Ethan, she saw him, her eyes brightening, and rushed towards him. Ethan instinctively recoiled, avoiding her embrace. What are you doing here? His voice was cold. Ethan, I was wrong, will you forgive me? SKYLAR cried. I shouldn't have lied to you, but I was forced into it. My dad's company collapsed, we lost everything, I only have you left. Ethan looked at her, feeling a wave of disgust. You only have me? He sneered. SKYLAR, have you forgotten? I have nothing left either. No, you still have me. SKYLAR said eagerly. We can start over. We can work hard together and rise again. Rise again? Ethan sounded as if he had heard a joke. What are you going to rise again with? That plastic surgery face of yours? SKYLAR's face paled. Ethan, how could you say that about me? Am I not stating the facts? Ethan advanced on her step by step. Didn't you approach me in the first place because of my Hayes family background? Now that the Hayes family has fallen, you come to me for comfort? SKYLAR, what do you take me for? A garbage dump? His words, like knives, brutally stabbed at SKYLAR's heart. She never expected the man who had once been so gentle with her to become so cutting. Ethan! You bastard, she shrieked, then turned and ran. Ethan watched her retreating back, feeling no satisfaction, only an endless emptiness. He opened the door to a pitch-black room. He didn't turn on the light, he simply collapsed onto the bed. In the darkness, he seemed to see Grace's face again. She smiled and told him, Ethan, I'll take care of you from now on. At the time, he thought it was just a joke. Only no. Did he realize that everything she had said was true? She had both the ability and the heart. But he, himself, had personally ruined everything. Tears silently streamed from the corners of his eyes. The next day, Ethan received a phone call. It was from the hospital. Are you a relative of Mr. William? The patient's condition has worsened and requires immediate surgery. Please come as soon as possible to settle the payment. Ethan's mind went blank. Payment? Where would he get the money? He hung up the phone and rushed out of the house like a madman. He had to borrow money. He contacted everyone he knew, but the friends who used to call him brother now avoided him like the plague. He endured scorn and humiliation, yet couldn't borrow a single penny. Finally, desperate, he arrived outside the Vance building. He knew this was his last chance. He had to see Grace. He would kneel and beg her. If only she would save his father, he would do anything. He stood at the building's entrance, looking up at the towering structure, his heart filled with humility and despair. He mustered his courage, trying to walk in, but was stopped by the security guard at the door. Sir, do you have an appointment? I'm looking for your Miss Grace. Which Grace are you referring to? Grace. The security guard looked him up and down, his eyes filled with disdain. Our Grace is very busy. She doesn't just see anyone who walks in. Tell her I'm Ethan, she'll see me. Ethan? The security guard sounded like he'd heard something amusing. You mean the Ethan who dumped our Miss Grace? Kid, you still dare to show your face here? I suggest you leave now, or don't blame us for being rough. Ethan's face instantly turned a deep crimson. He hadn't realized he had become the laughingstock of the entire company. He tried to force his way in, but two tall security guards grabbed his arms. Get out. He was mercilessly thrown onto the street, landing face first. Laughter erupted from the onlookers. Ethan lay on the ground, listening to the harsh laughter and feeling the pain in his body. In that moment, all his dignity was utterly crushed. Ethan didn't know how he made it back to the hospital. He stood at the operating room door, watching the illuminated red light, feeling as if his soul had been drained. Has the payment been made? A nurse walked over and asked him. He shook his head, his lips trembling, unable to speak. How can we operate without payment? What kind of son are you? The nurse complained with dissatisfaction, then turned to leave. Wait. Ethan called out to her. I'll get the money right away. He finished speaking, then turned and ran. Where would he go to get the money? He didn't know. He only knew that he couldn't let his father die like this. He ran out of the hospital, crashing through the streets like a headless fly. He had only one thought in his mind, money. He needed money. Just as he was about to despair, a car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a face he hadn't expected. It was Uncle, the middle-aged man who was always with Grace. Mr. Ethan. Uncle's voice was calm. Get in the car, Miss Grace wants to see you. Ethan froze. Grace? She wanted to see him? He practically scrambled into the car. The car drove on, finally stopping outside a private hospital. Uncle led him to a VIP lounge. Ethan saw his father, William. He lay on the hospital bed, hooked up to various tubes, but his complexion was much rosier than before. Your father's surgery was very successful, Uncle said. Ms. Grace has already settled the payment. Ethan's eyes instantly welled up. He turned around, looking at Uncle, his voice choked. She. Where is she? Ms. Grace is waiting for you upstairs. Ethan stumbled up the stairs. In the cafe on the top floor, he saw Grace. She was still so beautiful, so stunning he dared not look directly at her. Sit. She gestured to the seat opposite her. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down. RDLY. Why? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why did you save my dad? Grace stirred the coffee in her cup, not answering immediately. After a long moment, she looked up and met his gaze. Ethan, do you think I still care about you? Ethan's heart tightened, he said nothing. I saved your father, not because of you, Grace said. It's simply because he once complimented my spare rib soup. 3 years ago, when we first started dating, I went to your house for dinner. Your mother was endlessly critical of me, but only your father smiled at me and said I reminded him of a deceased friend's daughter. Just because of that? Ethan couldn't believe it. Just because of that, Grace said. Grace, repay kindness and avenge wrongs. He showed me a kindness with food, so I saved his life. We're even now. We're even now. What cruel words. Ethan's heart felt as if it had been torn open, bleeding profusely. As for you. Grace's eyes turned cold. What you owe me, you'll never be able to repay in this lifetime. Grace, I know I was wrong. Ethan dropped to his knees with a thud. Please, give me another chance, won't you? I swear, I'll treat you well from now on. I'll even give you my life. He cried like a child, snot and tears streaming down his face. Grace watched him silently, her eyes devoid of any emotion. A chance? She laughed. Ethan, do you know why Grandpa initially agreed to let me be with you? Ethan shook his head blankly. Because 3 years ago, I ran away from home and was almost harassed on the street, and you rushed out to save me. Even though you were beaten half to death too. Grandpa thought that even if you weren't particularly capable, you at least had some spirit, that you were a man. That's why he agreed to my foolishness, wanting to give you a chance. As long as you passed the test, everything of advance would have been yours. But what about you? You disappointed me too much. You are not only foolish, but also wicked. Ethan slumped to the ground, his face ashen. So, he had once been so close to success. He, himself, had personally ruined everything. Ethan, do you know? Grace stood up, looking down at him. What I hate most isn't that you abandoned me for profit. It's that you defiled the boy who selflessly saved me back then. You lost him. With that, she turned and left, the click of her heels on the floor sounding as if each step landed on his heart. Ethan reached out, trying to grasp something, but caught only emptiness. He finally understood that what he had lost was not just wealth and status. What he lost was the Grace who had once been the best and loved him most. And also the best, bravest version of himself. Grace left the hospital and got into Arthur's car. Is everything resolved? Arthur asked. Yes. Grace leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. Arthur didn't ask further, simply and silently adjusted the car's AC temperature higher. He knew that seeing Ethan had been an ordeal for her too. After all, he was the man she had truly loved for 3 years. To personally cast him into hell, how could she herself feel any better? The car was quiet, with only soft music playing. After a long while, Grace finally opened her eyes again. Let's go look at wedding dresses, she said. Arthur paused, then a brilliant smile spread across his face. Okay. He immediately turned the car around and drove towards the city's most exclusive bridal boutique. Grace watched the streetscape rush by outside the window, her heart feeling utterly peaceful. After seeing Ethan one last time and saying those words, she felt the last bit of lingering resentment in her heart dissipate. She had made a complete farewell to the past. From today, she would start a new life. In the bridal boutique, Grace tried on one white wedding dress after another. Each one was breathtakingly beautiful. Arthur sat on the sofa, watching Grace emerge from the fitting room, his eyes filled with awe and love. Does it look good? Grace lifted her skirt and spun around in front of him. Beautiful. Arthur stood up, walked over to her, and adjusted her veil. My, you look beautiful in anything. His voice was so tender it could melt butter. Grace's heart skipped a beat. She looked in the mirror at herself, enveloped in happiness, and at the man whose eyes were full of only her, and suddenly felt that this was the life she was meant to have. Just then, the door of the bridal boutique was pushed open, and an uninvited guest burst in. It was Ethan. He looked even more haggard than when she last saw him, with a scruffy beard, hollow eyes, like a vagrant. He saw Grace in her wedding dress, and Arthur beside her, and his eyes instantly turned red. Grace, he called out to her, his voice hoarse. The staff in the store immediately moved to usher him out. Let him speak. Grace stopped them. She was curious to see what else he had to say. Ethan walked up to her, looking at the white wedding dress she wore, his eyes filled with pain and regret. You're getting married? Yes. Grace's answer was simple and direct. To him? He pointed at Arthur, his eyes full of jealousy. Yes. What about me? Ethan's voice trembled. Grace, do you really not want me anymore? Does our 3 years together just count for nothing? Grace found it somewhat amusing. Ethan, you're talking about feelings now? When you were with SKYLAR back then, why didn't you mention our feelings? When you told me to get lost, why didn't you mention our feelings? Ethan was speechless from her questions. He dropped to his knees with a thud once more. Everyone present was stunned. Grace, I beg you, don't marry him. He clutched Grace's legs, weeping and pleading. I can't live without you. Please come back to me, won't you? Let's start over, I'll do whatever you say. Arthur's face darkened. He stepped forward, about to pull Ethan away. Grace, however, shook her head at him. She looked down at the man at her feet, bled to the dust, feeling no pity whatsoever. Ethan, get up. Her voice was cold. I won't get up. Not unless you promise me. Fine. Grace suddenly said. Ethan's head shot up, unable to believe his ears. You agreed? I agree, Grace said. As long as you crawl out of here right now, I'll consider giving you another chance. Crawl out? Ethan froze. Everyone around them was stunned too. Everyone watched him, waiting for his reaction. Ethan's face flushed, then paled. He thought of his father's illness, the company's debts, and his current predicament. He gritted his teeth, as if making a firm decision. Then, he actually got down on the floor. Under everyone's gaze, like a dog, he crawled little by little towards the door. With each crawl, a piece of his dignity was crushed. Arthur's brows furrowed tightly. He wanted to stop him, but Grace stopped him with a look. She just watched, coldly. Watching the man who was once so arrogant, abandon all his dignity for a fleeting, illusory chance. When crawled to the door, he looked back at her with eyes full of hope. Grace, I did it. Grace smiled. She walked over to him and slowly knelt down. Ethan, you're truly pitiful. However, you seem to have misunderstood something. I said I'd consider it. Now, I've considered it. And my answer is, you don't deserve it. You played me? Ethan lay on the cold floor, his blood seemingly freezing in an instant. He looked up, meeting Grace's cold and mocking eyes. There was no trace of their past affection, only the contempt one would show for trash. Played you? Grace chuckled, straightened up, and resumed her regal, high and mighty demeanor. Ethan, you think too highly of yourself. What do you think you are? Worthy of me going to such lengths to play a trick on you? Everything I did today was just to make you personally experience what it feels like to be trampled underfoot, stripped of all dignity. The humiliation you put me through back then, I'm turning it tenfold today. Her words were like a poisoned dagger, each phrase stabbing him in his most painful spots. He finally understood. From beginning to end, she had never intended to forgive him. Everything she did was purely for revenge. To make him experience what it felt like to fall from the clouds into hell. Grace. You're so cruel. He squeezed these words through gritted teeth. Cruel? Grace looked down at him. My tactics are pale in comparison to yours. At least, I won't kick you when you're already down. She finished speaking, linked arms with Arthur, and told the stunned staff, that one, wrap it up. Then, without another glance at Ethan on the floor, she walked out of the bridal boutique with Arthur. Outside, the sunlight was warm and bright. Grace took a deep breath, feeling a lightness she had never experienced before. Ethan, that name, would be completely erased from her life starting today. Arthur squeezed her hand, asking in a low voice, is that really it? He knew that with Grace's resources, making Ethan disappear entirely would be effortless. Yes, Grace said. Letting him live will be more painful than letting him die. Let him spend the rest of his life in regret, in pain, watching how happy I am. That is the cruelest punishment for him. Arthur looked at her. Her profile in the sunlight was breathtakingly beautiful. He knew his girl had finally emerged from the shadows of the past. She had become stronger, more radiant. And he would always stand by her side, accompanying her, protecting her. 3 months later, Grace and Arthur's wedding was held on a private island overseas. The wedding was lavish and romantic, rocking the business world. Henry solemnly placed Grace's hand into Arthur's. Arthur, my precious granddaughter, I entrust her to you. Don't worry, Grandpa. Arthur clasped Grace's hand, his gaze firm. I will spend my entire life loving and protecting her. Under the gaze of all their relatives and friends, they exchanged rings and kissed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a dilapidated rented room, Ethan was facing a bowl of instant noodles, watching the TV broadcast of the lavish wedding. On the screen, Grace, in her white wedding dress, smiled even more brightly than the stars in the sky. Beside her stood the handsome and distinguished man. They were so perfectly matched, so happy. That kind of happiness should have been his. He watched, and tears began to fall. He reached out, wanting to touch the familiar face on the screen, but only felt cold glass. He remembered her sparkling eyes 3 years ago when he handed her a steamed bun. He remembered her gentle smile as she cooked for him. He remembered her whispering I love you in his arms. Those scenes flashed through his mind like a movie, frame by frame. Finally, it froze on the image of her in her wedding dress, smiling at another man. He covered his face, finally unable to hold back, and burst into uncontrollable sobs. His cries were hoarse and desperate. He knew he had completely, forever, lost her. His life, too, was utterly ruined. On the TV, a reporter was interviewing the newlyweds. Mr. Arthur, Mrs. Grace, do you have any expectations for the future? Arthur looked at Grace, his eyes full of adoration. My future is her. Grace also smiled, and facing the camera, she slowly said, the past is gone, the future is here. Her voice, carried by the airwaves, reached Ethan's ears, like a heavenly decree and a hellish taunt. He turned off the TV, and the room plunged back into dead silence. He picked up the half-empty bottle of whiskey remaining on the table and took a harsh swig. The burning liquid scorched his throat and his heart. So he sat there, alone, with his drink, facing the empty room, for an entire night. Until dawn. The sunlight from outside streamed through the grimy window pane, casting dappled shadows on him. This was his life now. Live in regret, live in the past, forever with out peace. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it with your friends. We look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments section. Feel free to share your views, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exciting stories. See you next time.